at the beginning of the video era, when, and I mean video era as in, you know, VHSs and another format that, you know, went out of vogue called Betacam. There was also a third one too that I don't think it ever made its way to Australia, but it was called Video 2000. I think that there was some of that in Britain, but anyway, there was no Video 2000 in Australia. But anyway, in the era of VHSs and Betamax, you know, not Beta, which later became like, you know, that the Beta was used for Betacam, which was like a video format, and there was Beta SP and Digibeta, etc. But when the video business was just sort of beginning to, you know, kick off, I got a job at a production company, but the production company was owned by a video store owner. And I was looking for a production job and I went for the interview. A friend of mine told me that there was a couple of jobs going. So I went there, went for an interview. I wanted like a full-time job as like a sound recordist or a cameraman or something like that, or at least learning it. But instead, they told me there were no jobs available, but there was a job available. Excuse me. There was a job available for a night dubber. And what was a night dubber? Okay, well, dubbing meant that you would actually be creating VHS cassettes and you'd be doing it at night. You'd be dubbing it, meaning that you would have, the movie itself would be on these things called 1-inch reels, which were like these big spools. You would thread them onto a machine. It was usually made by, I think the machines I was threading on were Sony machines and also Ampex machines. But you would thread the movie. The movie would come on, like, would come in this plastic container on 1 inch. You would thread this onto a machine and you would then go and put blank video cassettes in like 100 or 200 machines that were in another room. And I would do all this manually. I mean, this is what I learned to do doing this job, because I did it on my own. But anyway, the interesting part of it was the reason why they needed a night dubber is because they did dubbing during the day. And during the day, they had clients that were kind of sensitive to certain material. So I think they had a few Christian clients, right? So some of the clients were maybe, you know, they didn't want them, the company didn't want the Christian clients knowing that they also had, you know, X-rated film clients. And so the night dubber, which I was invited to, that I was invited to apply for, would be the person who would be dubbing the X-rated material like during the night. So my shift would start at 11 o'clock at night. Like I'd arrive at around say 10:30 and I would officially start my shift at 11 o'clock, and then 8 o'clock in the morning my shift would end, and by then anything that I was dubbing that was of the X-rated variety would have to be off the machines. And this company, they ran 24 hours a day. Like they were a production company that did TV commercials and corporate videos, because that's eventually, well, of course, what I got into, and that was how I got to make my first movie using their equipment, and I covered that in the very first show of this channel. But night dubbing was very interesting because I hadn't really seen at that time when I got that. I'd seen a reasonable amount of X-rated movies. I mean, some of the movies that we were doing were put out by like companies like Caballero. I guess they were like the Australian, they were the Australian releases of American titles. And there was a very small period in Australia where XXX movies were legal. And it's really strange because that period actually came and went. And then what happened is that the movies only became legal in Canberra which is where all the politicians are, who also make the decisions about, legality of, movies. So it's kind of interesting that the people who made the decision that X-rated movies, let's say triple X movies, would be legal or not in the States were the politicians, but they made sure that they were still legal in Canberra, which was like the equivalent of, say, Washington, DC in the US. So the titles that I remember that I dubbed, because I didn't just do X-rated movies, like I also did horror movies. So we had like a few interesting clients. We had one which was Palace Home Video, which was great because Palace had a label called Palace Explosive. And Palace Explosive was all the really great horror films, like Squirm and Cannibal Apocalypse. We also had K-Tel, which was like quite well known as a video distributor. They were also, before that, they were known for producing, record compilations. Often they would, bring out these compilations of hit singles. They would all be compiled into one album and they'd come out through K-Tel. So K-Tel was a client, and one of their movies that was released in Australia by them was Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was fantastic. So that's why I ended up seeing Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I think about, oh God, I know, I probably saw it at least 100 times. Also films, kind of obscure films like the Robert Ginty film White Fire, Dog Day with Lee Marvin and the little boy from the Tin Drum, David Bennett. But the X-rated movies, the ones that I remembered as being, actually some were good, some were bad, of course. The better ones were, I remember the first time I saw it was Warren Evans, Sean Costello's film Hot Dreams. I thought that was amazing. Also, it's got a stolen Mike Oldfield score from the album On the Dawn. It's shot on film, and it's got an opening that's like a lift-off from De Palma's Dressed to Kill. But Warren Evans was a very, very classy filmmaker. Another really good triple X film I was particularly fond of was also Hanky Panky, which was made by the team of David I. Fraser and Svetlana. They also made a film called Sex Boat, and they had what was called like a Hawaiian series, which was Pink Lagoon, Surrender in Paradise. Some crap too. I mean, probably I'd say one of the worst X-rated films that I dubbed. It was just kind of poorly made. Was the Hal Freeman film Caught from Behind? No points for guessing. What the main focus of that was. We also had, it was interesting, out in the warehouse, some of the titles were kind of being ready for release, but they actually never got dubbed. Like one was Inside Annie Sprinkle. We had the 1-inch master of that, but it actually never got dubbed. Deep Throat, a dubbed like an uncut version of Deep Throat. Then later on, when X-rated films got banned in Australia, there was it's ridiculous really, there was like a 55-minute of cut of Deep Throat. I remembered that one of the editors did a cut down version of Deep Throat, and they literally took a 1-inch master and they cut out some of the explicit stuff, of course, but some of the explicit stuff, what they did, they zoomed in on it. And the zooming was particularly atrocious because they're zooming in on a 1-inch master. So of course, you zoom in on it and it pixelates. It's not like, for example, like doing say some kind of optical zoom on film, because what happens when you do that, the grain comes up, but it still can look interesting. But, zoomed in 1-inch master looks bloody awful. So you're watching a Deep Throat that's got all the hardcore cut out. I mean, it's not a particularly great film anyway, but still, to create that kind of version of it was just terrible. Also, there was another one, was The Spirit of 76. I remember dubbing that as well. But I actually probably really enjoyed more dubbing some of the, the obscure, more obscure K-Tel stuff. Even like I remember doing, I think I did about 4,000 VHSs of Hard Rock Zombies as well. Generally had like, I think it was like 120 or 150 machines. So I would have to load all the cassettes in. Then while the film was playing, I'd be checking the run on the, I'd be checking the previous run. And you'd always check the beginning of the cassette to make sure that it did actually record. And that was like, it was kind of spot checking it to make sure the machine didn't drop out and record. I mean, obviously sometimes it would have dropped out, but I was just there on my own doing that. It ended up being a particularly good job because sometimes I'd have a movie that would run a long time. So I was able to also go out into the studio and play with the cameras. We had, Ikegami D, Ikegami E cameras, really high-end broadcast cameras. So I got to learn the cameras and I got to learn all the equipment so that then eventually I was able to then begin working in production in that company because I'd familiarized myself with all of that while I was the night dubber. A lot of people thought it was a pretty damn good job, and it was, it became a little repetitive at the same time, but I really did enjoy the variety of films that I got to see. And definitely, the best stuff would have been, I would say, was the stuff that was being made by David Fraser and Svetlana. That was the best X-rated stuff. And, Warren Evans, the Warren Evans stuff was also very good. Chuck Vincent's Roommates was another one I remember dubbing. I'd also seen an R-rated and X-rated versions of both of those movies because Roommates actually got a theatrical release, mainstream theatrical release in the US. And Chuck Vincent, very accomplished filmmaker, who had also made R-rated movies as well, but Roommates got to a point when it actually, became like a mainstream movie. But of course there was also like a XXX version. And obviously when I say XXX, because there was a point when sometimes they would even like say there's a release of a movie and it'd be like X-rated, which would sometimes be a little explicit, but then XXX rated would always be something that would be completely, would fall under the auspices of of porn because it's extremely explicit. The masters that were out in the warehouse of the company that I work for, I would always go through them, and sometimes I was able to put up a master on the machine that wasn't part of my workload. Had two machines. And sometimes I was able to put something up and just have a little look at it. I remember one time I did see, it was the film Midnight Heat, which is another really great movie directed by Roger Watkins, who also made Last House on Dead End Street. And Midnight Heat with Jamie Gillis is a particularly good XXX movie, but made like a very, very more like a dark thriller, a great storyline. And I don't know why you never got to a point where we did that. But as I said, there was a very short period in Australia where X-rated movies were legal. And video stores created little back rooms where people could go in and, pick out their X-rated movies. But it didn't last very long. There was always government bullshit going on in Australia. It was almost like, it was very censorious at this time, especially like, mid 80s in Australia. It was so censorious. I mean, films like Dawn of the Dead were just cut to shreds. I mean, when I first saw Dawn of the Dead, I can do this in another video at some point too. But yeah, Dawn of the Dead was cut to shreds. There were X-rated theaters that were sort of, I guess they kind of went under the radar. There was an X-rated theatre in Melbourne called the Star, and the Shaft as well, very aptly named. And the Barrel, there was a Barrel and there was a Shaft, there was a Star. I think the Star was probably like the longest lasting X-rated theatre. That was there since like the 60s. And when I worked at Village Roadshow, I used to talk to one of the guys whose films, a distributor, Greg Lynch, who ran a lot of films at the Star Theatre. And some of the Star's films weren't always porn. Like they even ran films like Massacre at Central High. So again, but the night dubber job for me took a, certainly took a toll on my psyche, not because of what I was dubbing, but it just, the hours were horrendous, And also what happened is that when it sort of got to the end of like when I wanted to really move into production after I'd done about a year as a night dubber, and the dubbing was going on during the day as well, but during the day they'd be doing like regular movies and some Christian stuff as well. They had a client that was a Christian client. And so it was still going on. So when I would come in at 11 o'clock at night, sometimes something that had been dubbed or been dubbed during the day was still running. So, I would do an exchange with some of my friends at the company. There was a friend, Chris Banhidi, Chris LePage. These are all the guys who were involved in dubbing. And these are the guys who were working during the day who had... some more technical expertise than me, and all of us at some point were working in production as well. But yeah, it was an interesting company. It was called South Pacific Video, and it eventually was bought by another company called Allura, which was owned by another company that owned graphics companies. But the era of the night dubbing was for me, I certainly have very, very fond memories of the night dubbing and some of the excellent films, that I saw. And certainly, I definitely would still say that one of the most impressive was Warren Evans' Night Dreams, simply because it was just so beautifully shot. It was shot as well as any mainstream movie. Sharon Mitchell was the lead performer in that movie, but very well directed, and it also has like an incredible, what you would say, like an orgy scene that's in just off the harbour, just in the, on the river, just off New York City, and it's all cut to Mike Oldfield's On the Dawn. Great album, by the way. Mike Oldfield is more known for Tubular Bells, but yeah, have a listen to On the Dawn, because On the Dawn's incredible. Oldfield became known because of actually the use of Tubular Bells music in The Exorcist, and it's kind of interesting. It's only used very, very sparingly in The Exorcist. And it's not even used in a scary part. It's interesting. The flip side of the B-side of the Tubular Bells. Remember, before I saw The Exorcist, I always assumed that part of the album was used in this scary film, The Exorcist, which I hadn't seen yet. Because the flip side, the B-side of the Tubular Bells album actually has like this very sort of scary, with this like a wolf howling, etc. So I kind of assumed, well, that must be the stuff that's in The Exorcist, but it's not. The Exorcist stuff is actually some very, very almost minimalist, very melodic music that has like a certain kind of little, not, wouldn't say it's creepy, but it's got like a certain uneasiness about it, and that's what we use. But the choice to use the music in Hot Dreams obviously was, I'm sure they didn't get the rights to On the Dawn, because it's not credited. It's not credited in the same way that also the porn movie Skin Tight uses a track from Evangelis album. The track is called Pulsar, but in the movie Skin Tight, directed by Ed DePriest, I think, the music is credited to someone called Sabu, who not sure if he ever existed, but the track that's played over the opening credits of Skin Tight is the Vangelis track. And I rented that movie, Skin Tight, from Thomas Video in Detroit. I can't remember exactly where it was, but anyway, Thomas Video is a fairly well-known video store, and I will talk about that at some point too. But yeah, my time as a night dubber definitely played havoc with my sleep, because I would go home at 8 o'clock in the morning. I really couldn't sleep, and I'd maybe go to sleep at like 11, then wake up at 4. So I was having kind of like horror and porn in and out. My whole life was pretty much horror and porn for about a year, and unfortunately, most of the X-rated stuff was not good, and some of it was just really terrible. But in its defense, at that time, most of the X-rated films were being shot on film. Like even like the Hal Freeman stuff, like the Caught from Behind series, it was being shot on film. So there was a greater competence to the making of those movies than there was in the era when everything started being made on video. Aside from, what you would say would be like more accomplished filmmakers like the Dark Brothers, and also Stephen C. Adian's films, Rinstream. His first one, of course, Cafe Flesh, which just came out on 4K through Mondo Macabro, and my God, it's good. But even some of C. Adian's material that followed that, like Cowgirls of the Wild West, which is a wonderful film. Also Party Dollar Go-Go, shot on video, but they're well shot on video, but a lot of stuff that came out just wasn't all that well shot. Whereas in the 70s, you look at films like, Misty Beethoven, look at films like, Sex Wish, Forced Entry, and also a lot of French porn, a lot of the stuff that was being put out by Marc Dorcel was really well shot. Like Body Love, Klaus Schultz score. Body Love, beautifully shot film, so luckily a lot of the stuff that I was doing as a night dubber was shot on film. So, but still, a lot of it just wasn't that good. And I'd say in a sense, like the Hal Freeman films, which obviously them not being well shot never hurt them, because they went to, I think, about 20 films in the series, which probably the last ones were shot on video. But I think I was only ever dubbing like Caught from Behind, like 1, 2, and 3. I don't think I was doing any more than that. And they were pretty much, no real storyline, and or very, very bare bones storyline. Whereas filmmakers like David Fraser and Svetlana, like, made really genuinely well-made, I would say genuinely well-made erotica. And what I really loved about the films of David Fraser and Svetlana is that you really get a sense watching those movies that, you get a sense of the performers actually are really enjoying themselves. And it's it's very kind of positive, and that's not in any way to cast shade on some of the roughies, that were being made more in New York, even though like, Sean Costello's stuff was also, Warren Evans was also, he was doing like roughies, he was also doing more stylish movies as well. But I think the films that were being made in New York, it's kind of interesting because the New York filmmakers were, to me, felt more like real filmmakers. Cecil Howard as well, and then whereas the LA filmmakers, of course, some exceptions. You had like the Mitchell brothers, of course, in San Francisco were doing like, Behind the Green Door, Grafenberg Spot, those movies. But, which was one of the films that we did. Oh, also, of course, Insatiable was, I'd say, was probably one of the most popular films that I dubbed. It was a big hit in Australia. Again, of course, I think by the time Insatiable came out to Australia, they were also angling towards the ban. So Insatiable also had an R-rated version and an X-rated version as well. Again, R-rated version, who gives a crap, right? It's Insatiable. Very popular movie, got very, very heavily promoted, and I remember doing thousands of copies of that film, which meant, of course, it probably ran about 20 times, because each run was like 150 cassettes or so. So if I was doing 3,000, it's a lot of cassettes. That's about, at least about between 15 to 20 runs on that. I have to check them as well, etc. Anyway, life as a night dubber was certainly like an interesting period of my life, and I then went into production after the night dubbing ended. Anyway, if you like this video, hit the like button. I can't believe I'm saying it, but I am. Hit the like button and subscribe, and also let me know what else you'd like me to cover that I may have been involved in at some point. Anyway, I'm going to get back into talking about some of the films and talking about stuff that I like. But I've decided that at the end of each of these videos, I'm also going to recommend at least 2 movies that you can pick up yourself. And first one I want to recommend, without saying too much about it, I'm not going to explain it, I just say go and rent it, is this one, Lee Tamahori's Once Were Warriors, an amazing, amazing New Zealand movie. You can't go wrong renting this or buying it, buy the Blu-ray. And the other one, of course, this one is from good old Severin, and that's The Sinful Dwarf. Do a double feature, Once Were Warriors and Sinful Dwarf. It's a good contrast. Sinful Dwarf, absolute magic. See you next time.